Hey guys, Treetop here. Thanks for tuning in. The video I've got for you today is what I've been thinking about for a while. And what I like to do is a tune-up slash lubrication slash adjustment of your Lee Classic turret press. Now what I'm going to do in this video is try to show you some things that you maybe haven't seen before. Give you my own ideas on it. We're going to separate the linkage. We're going to drop the ram. I'm going to show you some adjustments that you can make to the ram head to fix them, and some cleaning you could do there to fix that annoying primer lever sticking problem where it hits the shell holder. We're going to talk about the Lee safety prime. We'll talk about the index system. I'll show you some spare parts that you may want to keep on hand. So stick with me. This might get a little bit long. I'll try to keep it concise, but hang with me and I'll try to make it worth your while. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to show you this little contraption I made, just a little sort of articulating arm. Allows me to put a drum style powder measure over the top of my turret press, and it keeps it isolated over the top so it's not running, shaking with the turret as the turret moves, and allows me to dispense a little larger amount of powder and do it fairly accurately. Anyway, I just want to show you that because I'm going to leave the base on, and it's not really self-explanatory what that is and why it's on my press. And it was kind of cool, thought I'd show it to you. So one thing I wanted to address before we get too far into this is the auto indexing system and this ratchet housing here and the bushing inside that's made out of plastic. Now this drives people crazy a little bit because they've got this plastic part on their press. But I've been using this press for thousands and thousands of rounds, and it's just not an issue. If that puts your mind at ease. This thing is durable. As long as you don't bind up and force it through, it's just not a problem. Now, the way I think about this is I think about this as the weakest link or fuse or a sacrificial part. So if you did have some binding or something and you went ahead and pushed through, I could see this piece giving way as opposed to something else on the press. So sometimes thinking about things is all about perspective, but this thing works fine. It's not an issue of precision because the ball that locks it into place is actually up in here. All this does is just push it to the next, advance it to the next thing. So I'll give you, that's just my perspective on it. One thing, if you take this off, make sure that you have this part oriented up. And the reason for that is if you turn it over, you have this part down and you drop the ram, you're gonna break this piece off. Okay, so just a few spare parts that I think is worth having on hand for a little insurance, in case you're worried about maybe the durability of the indexing system, is one is this little ratchet housing, I guess they call it, or something like that. Anyway, you can get these from Lee and have a few on hand if you're not confident in this. I think they're about $6. So that's one thing I would say. Also, inside the ratchet housing is this little indexing bushing, if you can see that. And this bushing, it looks like something that will wear out pretty fast, but if you keep it lubricated and the turret running free, they last for a really long time. And incidentally, if I don't get to it later, the flat side on this bushing goes up, the side with the little lip on it goes down. So those two parts from the indexing system. Now, next thing I will recommend that you have a few on hand is a little spring that you see right here. And this spring is important because it keeps the shell holder locked into place. And that's also important for free operation of the primer levers. Now, if this thing kind of walks out of here a little bit, the lever's got to push it back out of the way, and that's a catch point. So having a real strong one of these in place is part of the trouble-free operation. And the last thing I kind of recommend that you keep on hand is this little wiper deal. And this goes in if you're using the auto disc powder charging system, this little wiper fits right up in here. And as the charge bar or discs move back and forth, this little wiper just, fills the cavity. The powder comes out, fills the cavity, and then as the charge bar goes by, this wiper wipes the powder off clean. So if you're having leakage from up in here, or you're losing powder, this is something you could try to change. I've got a few of these on hand, and I just keep them, in case this surface here wears, for that very reason. That's all I've got for spare parts that I would, recommend. You can load up on these parts for, say, $10 or $15. maybe if you're a prepper, go 30. Be ready for the zombie apocalypse. Okay, so let's go ahead and disassemble this for cleaning and lubrication. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the indexing rod and housing off. Here's the indexing rod and housing right here. You can see how this bushing is oriented on there with the little lip down and the flat side up, and that's how you want to run it. So we'll just wipe this down and clean it, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, for the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to pull this ram out. And just a word about that, if you leave this priming lever and a shell holder in place, when you disconnect everything down here, it'll make it easier. That ram won't fall out on the ground. It'll hold it until you're ready to take it out. Now to disconnect the linkage so we can get the ram out, we're just going to use a 1/2 inch wrench, pull the handle off and pull this bushing out, and then we're going to use a 11/16 wrench to take these two nuts off here. Okay, now to get the ram free, there's a couple things to note. There is a pin on either side here, and these pins go into these upper levers here. These pins are pressed in and splined into the metal. So we don't want to disturb those or take them out. There's really no reason to. So that means that we can't take these levers clear off, and we're not going to be able to get this pin or shaft out that holds the rest of the levers out. What we're going to do is just exploit the tolerances in there in order to gain room to get each one out. So it helps to lift the press up a little bit and scoot this shaft over here to get one side out of the other. Now I'm going to bring this one up first. Sometimes it also helps to lift the ram up to take advantage of some of the room that's available there. And then once we do that, then we slide the shaft over here. And that gives us a little bit of room to work this side. And we just lift it loose like that, and the ram's free. Now I can take my shell holder out, and I can lift my priming lever out, and then let the ram, and let the ram drop down. So there's my ram removed, and my levers are free, so that I can clean all these contact points. Okay, so to clean the old grease and gunk off of it, I cleaned this pretty recently, so it's not in too bad a shape. But I just want to show you this anyway. I use a brake clean, and it's just a nice degreaser, and it leaves the surfaces pretty dry. And then there's enough in here where you can actually kind of rinse everything out, and then it dries pretty fast. So I use this for lots of stuff around the shop other than brakes. So you won't want to do this in the house. You don't want to do this outside, or at least in a shop or something. But anyway, I'm just going to spray this down and get that old grease off of there. Just pay particular attention down inside. I got a rag down there to catch the stuff that's coming out. Like I said, those primers produce some pretty dirty stuff there. So we'll flush that out and just get ready for some fresh lube. So there is the ram. A little bit on there I didn't want. So if you can see down there, let's go ahead. I'm going to spray off the levers here. Just kind of get the old grease out. And you have to work with the fact that you can't totally disassemble this. So just move the levers around and get access. And just kind of wipe the old stuff out. So after a while, you'll get dirt and stuff collected in here. And the dirt mixed with grease or oil or anything else you have on here is just going to create like a fretting compound that will cause wear. So it's a good idea to clean this up. If you keep it clean and lubricated, you can really minimize the wear and the linkage and excessive play that might develop over time. There we go. And I'm just going to rinse down in the center here. And we're going to wipe that out. Just going to do this like a rifle bore. Shove that rag right down in the center there. And that's about it for that. One of the other area you want to keep clean is, this area here on your turrets, and this area around here, and then the indexing ball that's right here. You should be able to see that. And I like to just spray a little bit kind of on it, and maybe try to get some behind it. And then we'll replace that with some lubricant afterwards. Just because this thing runs around, picks up dust and stuff, and we want to get all that out of there periodically. Okay, so let me show you the first area that we have trouble with the Lee Classic turret press. And you guys that reload 45 ACP with the large primers and try to do volume are going to know what I'm talking about. Probably not everybody, but some folks have issues with this primer lever hanging up as it comes in and it hits a shell holder. And basically it looks like this. This thing rides up a little bit and it catches right there. And if you got a primer sticking out, it's even worse. So that's one of the things I want to address, and I'll show you how to fix that. There's two things that cause it, but I'll show you this one first. So basically, when they machine this, we'll call this the ram head. I don't know what they actually call this piece, but this piece is separate right here, and it can be rotated left and right. When they machine this notch out here, it creates a sharp edge right here. So they come back in, which is standard practice, and just kind of break this edge right here. You can see how that edge is clean. Otherwise, it'd be very sharp on both sides there. Now, the problem with that is they could use a little more attention to detail. When they break this edge, sometimes they push some of that, the process they use, whatever it is, they push some of that metal around the corner and into this this notch right here where the primer lever rides. Now, if you measure the gap between the cup on the primer lever and really actually all this surface area here, it's not very much. And on the large primer lever, it's even worse. So the gap between here and here, or this edge and this edge, and the primer cup when it's supposed to be moving freely in and out, is, I've got about 8 thousandths clearance. So if you're pushing metal in there, one, that makes a catch point, and two, I've actually taken up some of the space that this lever needs to operate in. So fix for that is actually pretty simple. Just take a file, or whatever, maybe you have a better idea, but I just took a file and laid it in there and just kind of follow that flat area there and let the file take down any of that metal that's been pushed into that notch. Kind of hard to do around the camera here, but hopefully you see what I'm doing here. You don't want to take off a lot of material, but you do want to make sure that there's no rough edges that have gotten into that groove right there, or that notch that's been cut or machined. Now, second, I'll take it even a step farther. Obviously, this is low tech, but it works. And I just took a piece of sandpaper. You use like a 300 grit, and just put it in here, and just again try to maintain it as flat as you can, and just kind of polish those walls that primer lever has to ride up against. Make sure that there's no rough edges. Do both sides. And just sit and work them until they're nice and smooth, and this will greatly improve the reliability of that primer lever and the whole priming system. Okay, we got everything clean now. Let's go on to lubrication. So the first thing, since we just worked on the primer lever pocket, or whatever you want to call it, the first thing I'll show you that I like is I like to use this graphite dry film. And I like this to spray down in this little area here. We'll let this dry. And what that does is that gives me sort of a graphite slick surface on these walls here for that primer lever to operate. You can even put some of that on the primer lever just to make it even a little bit more slick. The second thing is this stuff is sort of static free. So if powder falls down in here, or debris from old primers being washed out, it's just going to tend to fall right through. So I think that's my product of choice for just cleaning up that notch there and just putting a little bit of sort of a soft lubricated surface on there, but still be dry film. Okay, so the next thing I've found that I really like for lubrication is just some wheel bearing axle type grease. And I like to use that on the ram itself. And I like to use that on all these contact points down in here. I like the higher viscosity of wheel bearing grease because it sort of gives me this kind of hydraulic, smooth feel when operating the ram. And after the grease kind of settles in and works in, I really like the way that feels, and the viscosity takes up any kind of play a little bit of extra play in there, so you just get a nice clean feel to it. The first part in lubrication I'll show you is, and I apologize, I don't have my grease gun, but these little pins that go right through here, and I'll put a picture up so you can see it, but these little pins are hollow, and they've got an exit hole that kind of comes out right where this lever rides. And so you can use a needle fitting like these. These are available at AutoZone. And put your grease gun on there and I use the same thing, wheel bearing grease, and just pump it through there, and it'll come out around this lever on both sides. And if you got any wear or fretting products in there, you can actually purge, what's called purge lube it, and push the old grease out, if there is any, and put fresh grease in there. Now, if you do that, it's going to build up under here. You're going to want to get in there and clean that out, particularly if you're working in your house and you've got carpet, because that's just going to work back and forth and eventually kind of maybe fall out on your carpet, and I don't want Treetop to be responsible for that. So anyway, just a little needle fitting on both sides there. Pump a little grease through there. That'll lubricate this upper and keep the wear down on that. Okay, so for the grease, I like to get in here and put the grease on these little pivot points here. Slide that shaft back and forth there, and just a little bit on there. Put some up here where this one's going to eventually ride around that edge there, and work that back and forth. Make sure you get good lubricant in it. You can feel it right away. Takes any roughness out of those levers. And then after we run this for a little bit, we go back in there and just wipe that down, get the excess that kind of comes out. You put on more than you need and wipe out what you don't need. Okay. Now these two little lugs here, you see, they go into the go into the ram, and they're actually open to the interior of the ram. So when we put the grease on these, just make sure that you focus on putting it on this part right here and keep it off of this flat part. Because if you put it on that flat part, I know from experience that it's going to start collecting primers and stuff. I actually had, one time I just put a bunch on there and closed it up, and I had a bunch of primers build up on there and they wouldn't fall into the collection tube. So I don't do that anymore. Now for the ram, you can see how that's hollow in there. And we just want to keep the grease out of the most interior part there. I'm just going to use my finger on this part here. I'm just going to, this is dry from getting the old grease off. So I'm just going to rub this on there good. And lastly, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit down in here too. Make sure that this ram is riding on grease and not metal-to-metal contact. And like I say, it really gives a nice feel when you run that ram once it gets kind of worked in. Okay, so we are ready for reassembly. Just going to go ahead and put this up in here. And you'll feel when it first goes in, it's real stiff until it kind of wears in. We're going to throw a priming lever back in there. We don't have to, so it gives us a little hands free if we want to let the ram go. So now move your levers over, and we're just going to do this in the reverse. I'm going to just lift the ram up. It gives you the most space that you can get free. Sometimes you can spin this a little bit, kind of get it in easier. Okay, so one side's in, but by putting the lever almost horizontal, that lets you take advantage of what play is in this fairly well. So I'm going to move this over. If you tap on this, do it with a very light mallet or something, don't hammer on it to get it. Okay, so you see I've got that in place now. Before we put the 11/16 nuts on, we're going to have to hold this in place, because once we tighten this down, it's going to take up that space, and then that little bushing or spacer won't fit anymore. Now we're ready to reinstall our handle. Okay, so the next part under lubrication, I'll show you what else I like. This is my indexing rod with the indexing bushing still installed, and it's in good shape, so I'm not going to take it off. But I like to use this little Shooter's Choice FP10 lubricant. This is just gun lubricant, and stuff's really slick, and I like the way it works on here. Just put a little bit on that shaft so that this bushing has something to ride on. Okay, the other place that I like to use this FP10 is on the turret area up here. I just like to put some on my finger and just kind of work it into that indexing ball there, and just keep a little bit on the interior of this this turret where it has the turret housing or whatever I'm not sure what it's called, but and then here I'll put a little bit just on there and some on this lip up here, because as it rotates it sits up here. This lip sits on there. This stuff does a really nice job of making the press run smooth. So that's pretty much it for lubrication. Okay, so phase 2 of getting the primer lever to work properly is alignment of this ram head that's on top up here. And this thing is adjustable. You can actually put something in there. Now you can use a little 1/2-inch wrench, and you can actually rotate. It'll split right here. You can actually rotate this left or right. Now why that's critical, I'm going to show you. I'm going to mess up my press to show you. Use a screwdriver instead in this slot here. I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure and I'll move that out of place. Now what's critical with this lever is that it comes down on this flat spot right there, nice and clean. And if you notice, it's got a couple little nubs here, sort of like guides. And there's a radius in the bottom there. What we don't want to do is come down anywhere near these nubs. We want to lie evenly on this flat part here. And the reason is because if you come down on the side, watch how this primer lever swings over. See that right there? And if the primer lever swings over, it's going to slide up the side of the housing here. And again, if there's anything there, it'll catch and change the way this primer lever operates. It has to be free, and it has to be able to let gravity, this weighted part, just flip back and forth without any restriction. So what we can do is we can get in here and just make sure that we fall freely on that flat spot without it side loading either way. Now, if you really want to get technical, you can actually use a feeler gauge. And you can measure how much free play you have here, move it to one side, measure here, split it in half, remove a couple thousandths, and get a feeler gauge. For me, I had about 12 thousandths. So if I round down to 10, split it in half to 5, I can actually use a feeler gauge to see where I'm sitting here. So I run the press up and down and let the primer lever land where it will. And when I do that, if I can get in here without shifting from side to side too much, I know that I've got this thing adjusted to where the lever is in the center of the space that's available. And this is a little time consuming, but it's worth taking your time to get it right, I think. And I'm just going to put something in there. Really, the longer lever you have, the easier it is to get a fine adjustment. These things like to jerk back and forth, so that can wear on your nerves a little bit. But anyway, maybe the measurement's not so critical, but I just want to show you that if I can get an equal gap on both sides and this thing's laying freely, then I know that I'm in a position with this head that I'm going to get good reliability and not preload this lever to one side or the other. We'll go ahead and put the indexing rod back together. Again, the flat side goes up. You don't need to over tighten this, just snug is fine. That's probably how most of these get broken, is they're stripped. We'll go ahead and put this turret back in here. I'll work that through a little bit. Nice and smooth. So the next thing we'll do is we'll make an adjustment here. This is already adjusted, but I'll just show you what I like on this part, and then we'll talk about some height adjustments you can make here. Now this part, I just like this Lee safety prime arm to come in, and it seems like if you set it up maybe just 1 to 2 degrees to the right of the lever when it's sitting here naturally, that seems to be just about right for good service on that. So guys, the last thing I want to share with you in regard to the Lee safety prime is the possibility of changing the elevation of this whole priming lever. And for me, that's something that seems to have helped the reliability of the primer exchange from the Lee safety prime into the priming lever. So this comes with a 25 thousandths or 250 thousandths bushing, 1/4 inch bushing, mounted right under here. Now what I've done is I replaced this bushing with 3 5/16 washers of varying sizes to get a stack up that is about 195 thousandths. What is that, 55 thousandths less? So I want this priming lever arm to hit right about here, guide up, and at the point where the primer goes in, have enough contact here to flatten out that priming lever and square the dispenser to the lever so that the primer can get in here more effectively. And so lowering this seems to be just about the right medicine for that. See how that squares up right there? Anyway, that's something else you can play with to improve the reliability of the primer exchange to the primer lever. Now the last tiny little tip I'll give you is to run a little piece of tape, like I've got electrical tape here, something to absorb sound, so that when that indexing rod taps up and down on there, you don't have that steel on steel sound that will bore through your brain after 100 or so 9mm rounds. That's just my last little tip for you guys. So guys, that's it for me today. I hope you found something here that you can use. I hope I showed you something that you probably haven't seen before. That's always my goal. And anyway, if you think this video is useful, consider cutting that URL, pasting it into your chat rooms where you're talking about reloading and share with others. Also, social media is great. Consider clicking the like button, maybe subscribe. I'll try to keep new information coming to you periodically. Anyway, thanks. Be safe and have a great day.